Hey everybody, welcome to this first lesson in this new deep dive series. So in this one, we're going to talk about webhooks. I'm going to give you a quick introduction of what webhook is, what the webhook node is inside n8n, how to use it to communicate with external application. And in our case, we're going to be using Lovable, of course, but webhook node is used to communicate with other external applications as well, like the voice agents that I bet. So I'm just going to quickly give you that introduction and talk about the few details that are very, very important. So make sure you don't skip this. Make sure you watch this till the end, because the lessons that are upcoming is all going to be the communication will all happen to this webhook node. So you want to make sure you have a good foundation. First of all, on this page, make sure you read through this, because this is a really good introduction and gives you an example. But just a quick brief, again, webhook is just a method that allows these apps and services to communicate in real time. So what that means is that instead of you manually going and requesting information from application, what webhook in the web development mode, what it allows is that you're essentially listening for some kind of an event trigger. So whenever some event occurs, you are listening via the webhook, and that webhook receives that information, and therefore you can process whatever payload or whatever information that front-end application is sending. Again, if this sounds confusing, don't worry about it. We're going to go through these details plenty of time. But again, make sure you go through this, because there's a really nice example here that I've provided. Again, it says that you own a restaurant and you want to get notified whenever someone places an order online. So instead of manually checking emails or manually checking your orders, you essentially have a webhook node that's listening for that event. And then once that gets triggered, that's when you go on and do whatever you need to do for moving forward. So webhook in n8n, the webhook node itself. So if you click on that documentation, there's a good detail here that the n8n docs have. So make sure you go through that as well. But this is essentially a way to trigger an application. So webhooks inside n8n on your workflow is a trigger, meaning this is the start of your workflow or the start of your automation. So I'm here in my blank workflow. So the first step is obviously adding a trigger. So once you click on the first step, as you can see on the right hand side, you have a bunch of trigger options, right? So if you look in the middle right here, it says on a webhook call. So I'm going to click on this. So this opens up automatically. Let me zoom in a little bit. All right. So by default, webhook, that as soon as you put the webhook in or click the webhook trigger, the method is going to be get. So let me go through and actually give you a few details of what these different parameters are, because this is very important as well. First of all, and probably the most important thing to notice here is your webhook URLs. There's a test URL and a production URL and your webhook node. Now this is very important, because if you put the wrong URL inside your whatever application you're building, whether it's on the front end or you're trying to communicate with something else, then what ends up happening is the test URL has this little test. If you can see on the bottom or in the middle right here, it says n8n.cloud/webhook-test. If you switch to production, you'll see that test disappears. So make sure when you're putting this webhook on your front end that you're paying attention to this, because if you have this on live in production, meaning that your workflow is active, then you need to make sure that you're switching to production URL and you're putting this on whatever relevant application you're building in the front end. But in my demo videos, I always use test URL, because it's a good way for us to see exactly what's happening when we test the workflow. Because when information gets sent, then this gets triggered, and it has that little spinny thing that then further processes everything else, because it's a good way for us to see what's happening. But if you're building a production URL or a production app, make sure you change this to active, and then make sure the production URL is being copied. All right, but we're going to keep it in test URL. So HTTP method, this is very, very important. The only two that you're going to pay attention to is get and post. So in the web development world, if you want to get information, just like it says in the name, then you use a get method. But if you are sending information, then you're going to use a post method. Majority of the time, we're going to live in the post method, because every time information is being sent, that's going to be sent in the body of this URL. And again, I will go through, I know this might be confusing if you're new to webhooks and if you're new to coding, then this might sound confusing, but just bear with me. Just know that post means that you're sending information and get means that you're getting information. That's it at this point. Keep it as simple as possible. But most of the time, the webhook, we're gonna keep it as post method. All right. So the next one is the path. So this is just a path. It comes with this gibberish when you add it by default, but it's always a good habit to change this. So I always put something like test or whatever I'm building, right? So for this one, let's just put test. And as you can see, as soon as I change the path, it changes the path here. It just makes it shorter. It makes it nicer. Actually, instead of test, because there's this webhook dash test, let's do something else. Webhook dash, I'm just going to put my name. There you go, right? So now you have test URL that has changed. At the end, instead of that gibberish, now it says Zubair. All right, great. So authentication, for now, don't pay attention to this. Authentication we'll explore later down the line on this series when we're building a more complex application, full stack application. If we need to have authentication enabled, then we'll go through that. But it just basically means that when you're sending information to your webhook in N8N, you want to authenticate the user. So if you apply that, then there's a bunch of other stuff that needs to go there. But like I said, for now, just leave it as none. Respond, this is also very important. So immediately means that as soon as this node gets executed, it will respond. When the last node finishes, just as it says, it will return the data for the last executed node using respond to webhook node. So this is very important. We're going to be actually using this respond to webhook node. And I'm going to explain that when we go through the examples, but this essentially means that you're waiting for the webhook, you're waiting for your front-end application to send you information. And once our automation gets processed inside our N8N, then we need to send that information, the response from our automation back to the front end. So therefore, you need to make sure you using respond to webhook node. However, here's the caveat here. When you choose this method, you need to add another webhook after you do your automation. So for example, let me just quickly add set node. Okay. So whatever, right? For now. So now let's imagine this is your entire automation and you do something and you send this information. You want to send this information back to the front end. Then you need at the end of your automation, at the end of your workflow, whether it's an AI agent, whether it's a complex workflow, then you need to add another webhook. So if I search for webhook, right there. So as you can see now, instead of, I'll just add another trigger. No, we don't need to add another trigger. Sorry, I chose the wrong one. Let me get rid of this. Webhook. There you go. We need to choose this one. Respond to webhook, because this is the trigger. As it says in the bottom, starts the workflow when a webhook is called. We need to respond to webhook. So it says returns data for webhook. So you need to click on this. And now you can essentially, whatever information comes in from here, from your front end, it gets processed in the middle. So whatever your automation is or whatever your AI automation and AI agents are, once that information gets passed through or gets processed, then we need to send the output back to the webhook that sent that information. In our case, it will be obviously our front-end application. So therefore, it's going to send that information back. And it's very simple. It just says respond with first incoming item. A lot of times, if you're sending like a file, then you choose this. But to be safe, you will always select this all incoming items. So that way now you're, sending whatever information that's coming out from your automation. All right, so that was a quick introduction to webhook. What we're going to do next is we're going to now create our, We're going to obviously do an introduction to Lovable, and then I'm going to go through and step-by-step walk through how to send information from Lovable back to N8N, so that way you can see exactly how that information is sent. And then obviously we'll create like an AI agent on this one, so make sure you watch that one, because that kind of completes the whole process where we're sending information from Lovable to our N8N via webhook. We're going to attach an AI agent to do something, and we're going to respond back to our front end. So that way it kind of completes the whole cycle. And then from then on, we'll build our, more complex apps. All right. So thanks for watching. Again, make sure you're watching all these again in order, so that way you don't miss anything. All right. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.